Hey, Cypher here. When I sat down to watch Hacksaw Ridge, I was ready to tear this movie apart. Mel Gibson directed this movie about a Medal of Honor winner named Desmond Doss, and I think I've made my opinion on Braveheart quite clear previously. So I had my cup of whiskey at the ready and my hookah billowing clouds. With my feet up on the coffee table, I leaned back with a notebook to mark every minor discrepancy. I don't think I've liked a single movie directed by Mel Gibson. We Were Soldiers was good, but he didn't direct that. So count me surprised with the result of this one. It is no shining example of a great based on a true story movie, but it is the best we got in the miserable year of 2016. Although Denial was good too, but I haven't reviewed that one, plus I haven't seen Hidden Figures. But I thought Hacksaw Ridge was so good that I was actually rooting for it to win at the Oscars, much to my historian friends' dismay, because I can't overstate how disliked Gibson is in the historical world. Desmond Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist, who are millennialistic Protestants. Essentially, they believe the second coming of Christ is imminent, and so they have to be especially devout to assure their ascendance during the rapture. And Doss was certainly devout. He refused to take up arms and fight as a component of his faith. When World War II rolled along, Doss felt the need to join the war.
You won't be able to live with yourself if you go.
No, I won't be able to live with myself if I don't.
His brother Harold joined the U.S. Navy, and Desmond joined the Army with the goal of becoming a medic. He joined even though he was told that he could take a deferment from being drafted.
I was working in Newport News shipyard, Newport News, Virginia.
No, I had a job in a defense plant. I could have taken a deferment, but that ain't right.
When he enlisted, he joined as a conscientious objector, with the express intent of never handling a weapon.
They told me, said, listen, this does not mean that you object to serving your country. It means you're going in with religious scruples. Without this, you most likely would be court-martialed. So that's the reason I have that classification.
The U.S. actually had camps for such objectors. They would serve their enlistment, mostly unpaid, doing labor stateside, such as infrastructural improvements. Doss wanted no part in that, saying he was not a conscientious objector, but a conscientious collaborator.
You're a conscientious objector, and you joined the Army.
Well, no, sir, I'm a conscientious cooperator.
The Army acquiesced, because they needed combat medics, but not without Doss facing some trouble with his comrades who saw his passivity as a risk to the whole.
You see, Private Doss is a conscientious objector. So I plead with you, do not look to him to save you on the battlefield, because he will undoubtedly be too busy wrestling with his conscience to assist.
Medics, according to the Geneva Conventions, are supposed to be non-combatants, but they can defend themselves if need be.
Nips put a premium on shooting medics. The white's a bullseye.
So many carry arms. As such, Doss's unwillingness to do so could have endangered people who might need defending while he rendered aid.
You know, the fighting in the Pacific was so deadly and treacherous that we even had to arm our medics.
It's quite a vexing issue.
I got the energy and the passion to serve as a medic. Right in the middle with the other guys. No less danger, just while everybody else is taking life, I'm gonna be saving it.
He was deployed to the Pacific Theater, where he served in Guam, the Philippines, and Okinawa. He was valorous prior to Okinawa, but it is his time on the AMEDD escarpment that made his name. That part of the island was so bloody that it was termed...
That's our objective. Hacksaw Ridge.
Roll credits. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Up there, the unit Doss was attached to was forced to retreat down the escarpment. Doss refused to retreat and stayed behind in that extremely hostile area. He spent 2 days up there, rescuing between 50 and 100 men while under fire. He was so well respected by his unit after this that they willingly waited to make a second assault so that Doss could conduct some prayers on his Sabbath.
You're supposed to begin that assault 10 minutes ago.
We're waiting, sir.
Waiting for what?
Private Doss to finish praying for us, sir.
It was a successful assault, and they took the escarpment. Later, Doss was hit with a mortar, and that severely damaged his leg. While he was being carried back, he saw another man wounded on the side of the road, so he willingly flopped off the stretcher to give it to another soldier. While he awaited the next stretcher, he was shot by a Japanese sniper and forced to use a rifle as a splint. For his bravery, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. There is a plethora of primary source material on this. The Library of Congress has a program where they collect oral histories of soldiers. I've actually been interviewed by this project myself, so it is a wide-ranging program, and they interviewed a number of people associated with this event, including Doss himself. It's a fantastic resource, and it's publicly available. Furthermore, there is just a lot of interviews of Doss, because he's a Medal of Honor recipient. MOHs are thoroughly researched nowadays. Before World War I, there were a lot of bad MOHs awarded, such as every soldier who initially invaded Veracruz in 1914, and 20 were awarded to the perpetrators of the Wounded Knee Massacre. So now they make sure candidates are worthy. A lot of that material is published. Plus, MOH winners often have fan sites built around them and a whole lot written about them. So this is an easy subject to research. Mel Gibson was clearly working off of the same material, because he actually cuts to some of these interviews at the end of the movie. It's almost like he's citing his sources. The Doss estate has been reluctant to allow directors to use his visage, and with good reason. We all know how dishonest Hollywood often is. Just look at basically any other episode of this series. Gibson probably had to allow script approval by the Doss estate, which shows the extent to which this movie went to be accurate. It has its inaccuracies, but because they put in the work to make this worthy of its derivation, Gibson managed to make the inaccuracies not affect the narrative too much. Doss's family here is depicted with overstated character traits. Desmond's father was certainly a drunkard and was kind of jacked up mentally because of what he saw in World War I. But he was not abusive of his wife or sons. His supposed abusiveness is shown to be a component of his shell shock, but it is a little too heavy-handed at times.
Remember him, Bertha?
Don't.
What?
I just hope that when our Hal gets shot, it's through the front of his jacket. Artie got hit in the back. It blew most of his guts and intestines out his front, awful everywhere.
This is the only thing that has had a formal objection raised by the Doss estate. But there is further problems here. The scene where you see Desmond's father pulls a gun on his wife is depicted as him freaking out and shooting the roof, whereas the reality was more complicated. He had pulled a gun on his wife's brother, whom he had been arguing with over his drinking. His wife jumped in the way to stop him. Desmond disarmed him after that. Also, Desmond's father did not walk into a court-martial or a general's office in his old uniform to stop the court-martial. He simply called a few people, but that wouldn't have been as exciting of a scene. There's also a scene where Desmond hits his brother in the head with a brick as a kid, and it is shown as he is about to be punished that he saw a picture of Cain and Abel right before being punished for the misdeed. This is an odd mix of fiction and reality here, because that picture was a big part of Doss's pacifism, and he would reiterate that for his entire life.
That's the picture had Cain had killed his brother Abel. Now, what how in the world could a brother do such a thing?
Him hitting his brother is something I can't quite confirm, though, and that would seem to be a story that would have been told in these interviews. Generally, though, these were all changes to add drama to the story, and they do so quite well. They could have been a little more accurate, but they ultimately don't matter to the greater story arc. But there is one discrepancy in terms of the family that does. They show his girlfriend and later wife, Dorothy Doss, as being a nurse when they met. She was not at the time. They met at church. This seems minor, but it builds up to another inaccuracy, and then a fundamental misunderstanding about Doss's later life. The inaccuracy it builds up to is a big climactic scene where Doss is jailed for refusing to touch a rifle, while his fiancée is left at the altar waiting for him to return and marry her.
I won't touch a rifle, sir.
I'm not asking you, Private! Refuse, and I will have no recourse but to court-martial you.
I can, sir.
Sometimes men just get cold feet.
Now, the Army did jail Doss for this specific occurrence, but he had already gotten married by that time. He never left her at the altar, so the two main plot details about his love life in this are incorrect. Now, I get that Gibson is trying to compress time and build drama here, but this is a step too far. It is a narrative element, after all. Furthermore, there is a storytelling opportunity that is lost by doing this. After the war, Doss was on disability payments because of his injuries. He really couldn't get a job. Dorothy was forced to become a nurse to pay for the rest of the family. His injuries would be a constant problem for him for the rest of his life, and by pushing these events around, we miss the hardship that brought Dorothy to nursing in the first place, and how they had to pay for their family. Doss's time in the Army is also compressed for cinematic time. He is shown going through basic training with the rest of his unit, which is not how that works. He did go to Fort Jackson, but he went elsewhere to become a medic. So this is merely to compress time, and that's quite forgivable. But I do have to ask, what the heck is up with the scene where a guy throws a knife into another guy's foot on the first day of basic? Where does an idea like that even come up in Gibson's head? Ever since Full Metal Jacket came out, movies need their basic training sequences, and they often go to ridiculous extents to capture the magic that was R. Lee Ermey's performance in that Kubrick movie.
There is no racial bigotry here. Bullshit, from now on you're Private Snowball. Do you like that name?
Polish. Wrong. I believe you must have Cherokee or Shawnee blood in you.
Let me see your Indian war cry, son!
I don't... Ah! That's a war face! Now let me see your war face!
And this is the dumbest instance I've seen since Jarhead killed a dude during the night infiltration course, or Nick at Night as we called it.
Called the Night Infiltration Course. It's real machine gun fire combined with simulated artillery, and though you can't see them, the soldiers are crawling to capture 3 enemy gun positions.
So yeah, who playfully throws a knife at each other's feet? Especially during a time where your every move is scrutinized. And I do mean every move is scrutinized.
There's something off in your presentation, Private.
I have a knife in my foot, Sarge.
Oh, yes. Of course. That's it, the knife.
By the way, Doss was never given a night beating during basic training, according to the evidence. So we'll skip ahead, just as the movie kinda does, because once Doss is deployed, he just gets thrown at Okinawa, as though he hadn't been in any other battles. It shows him marveling at the dead being trucked away.
What's left of them? These are the guys we're replacing.
Of course, he had already seen that many times before this, but it's not really important to show that he had been elsewhere. That doesn't matter for the narrative's sake. It is just kinda weird when you know that he had actually been fighting elsewhere. What does matter is the part about his heroism. Gibson apparently left out the part about him giving up his stretcher because he thought it would be too unbelievable for audience members. He even skips over another famous act of heroism where Doss was actually one of the people to string up the nets that soldiers ascended to get atop Hacksaw Ridge. That picture you're seeing is of the actual Doss. He looks all nonchalant in this, but the cameraman was unwilling to get any closer to the heavy gunfire. Instead, when the company arrives at the escarpment, the nets are already strung up in the movie, possibly because Gibson thought it would be too much for audiences. But then again, he does do some of the typical Hollywood overglorification. For instance, he shows Doss bandaging up a Japanese soldier, and the movie also talks about him lowering Japanese soldiers down. There is no evidence for him giving aid to the enemy at all, although there was at least one case in which an American bandage was found on a Japanese soldier. But yeah, why even include it? Then, in the final moment, it shows some Japanese who falsely surrender and throw grenades. I see you typing there. There were plenty of recorded instances of that happening, so don't try to say otherwise. I don't get why people jump all over that kind of stuff, especially when it deals with the Japanese. No, the problem here is that the protagonist kicks one of the grenades away, and that is how he is wounded. For something that was supposed to be ultra-heroic, this final moment had me laughing and rewinding just to laugh some more.
What the fuck?
bloody shot.
And you fail.
I mean, come on, that was too easy. Also, he was never wounded on Hacksaw Ridge. He was actually wounded later in the fighting. All that being said, the movie more than makes up for its inaccuracies. It is open-minded and doesn't try to make anyone into cardboard villains, where that would have been so easy to do. Even the Japanese are shown sympathetically. Instead of saying, "Look at the big mean bully harassing the peaceable man," it actually engages in the conversation about whether he was a legitimate danger to those who might depend on him to pull a trigger.
So how come you don't fight? You think you're better than us?
No.
But what if you was attacked?
This isn't good for anybody.
Sure ain't what I joined up for.
It's not about what you joined up for. It's about the lives of every man in here.
That is difficult to do as a historian, let alone Mel Gibson, who by the way still hasn't made up for Braveheart. Anyways, when the fighting begins, it is a romping good time. I feel like Gibson is just going back to what he learned in the making of We Were Soldiers, because it is that kind of awesome. I've seen some critics complaining that this movie glorifies violence too much, especially with a pacifist as a main character. And oh boy, does it glorify violence. But these critics are misguided to say the least. Doss refused to take up arms, yes, but that doesn't mean he wasn't an active participant in the violence. Being support is just that, support. Think about it this way. Who is more responsible for the kill? The person who fires the cannon, calculates the trajectory, or calls in the fire mission? Combat medics may be helping others live, rather than killing anyone themselves, but they are ultimately feeding into the whole mechanism of combat as a whole. To complain about the glorification of violence in this movie is to fundamentally misunderstand the point of the story. And I'm not just talking about the story of the movie, but the actual story. It is showing that somebody can be a pacifist and a war hero at the same time. That's the point, and it shows it well. I think there is actually quite a market for these kinds of movies. If Hollywood wants characters worthy of the glorification treatment that movies often give, just go into more Medal of Honor recipients. There is so much more material to support this stuff. Heck, I've even advocated this before on this very channel. It is easy material to get a hold of, and it is necessarily dramatic material. The only other movie I can think of that completely focuses on an MOH winner was Sergeant York, and that movie is very dated, since it is essentially World War II propaganda glorifying World War I. So how did it take this long for Hollywood to figure out this formula? Where are these movies, Hollywood? If Mel Gibson, of all people, can do it well enough, then making more of these should be a slam dunk, or should I say, an exploding field goal.